Welcome back to another TouchDesigner tutorial. Today we are going to be creating this particle wave. We are going to be doing this with some audio reactive elements. We're going to be using some patterns and we're going to be chopping that into some particles. We're going to be using a box as a transform. We're going to create a little standard feedback loop and then also do a lookup to create these colors. So let's do what we do and let's get into it. All right, so let's go out of here and we are going to create a new base. As normal, we're going to close this out and let's recreate everything. So the first thing that we need to add is we are going to continue on kind of how we've been doing some of these tutorials is we are going to do an add point. We are going to then add a convert. And here is, of course, I always have to look for everything. And we're going to convert this to particles per point. And we're going to render this as point sprites. On the end of that, we are going to take this into a transform. And we are going to then put this into a null. So at the end of our null, we are going to create our typical geometry network. So we're going to start out with our geometry node by right-clicking on the outlet. We are then going to add a camera. We are going to add our render top. And then we are going to add our material, and this time we are going to use point sprite again. So let's put this on there, drag it over the geo, and then farm our material. And then in here, we are going to put a null at the end of our chain. I'm going to name this background, so BG. And then before that, I'm going to right click on here and then add a transform. And in the transform, I'm going to change my alpha to 1, comp over background. So then we can start to create our background in here, have our nice black background. You can see our little point in space right there. And then we are going to, in this case, I'm going to actually add a box. And I'm going to put the box into our add network. And you can see in here, you can see the elements of our box in space, right? So you can see the different points, the different vertexes in space, and that will kind of give us like a little bit of where we go and how we start this. Okay, so what we want to do here is we're going to be using chops. And in our chops, we are going to be selecting a pattern chop. So we take this chop right here, and we're going to do a number of things here. So in our common, we are going to, or in our channel, we are going to rename this as TX. And then I'm going to copy this a couple times here. So copy, paste, copy, paste. And I just did that so I don't have to write T, I guess, but TY. And then I'm going to do TZ or TZ, right? So we have our 3 different patterns. And this is kind of how we're going to draw some of our particles in space, right? So we're going to then add a merge. We're going to merge all these 3 together. And the reason we named them TX, TY, and TZ is now we have our points in space here for our chops as we're going to transform this. We're going to take this and we're going to add a null on the end of this just to keep things nice and clean. And then we are going to take this and we are going to do a chop to sop, right? So we're kind of just setting up this network again. And this has a little triangle here. It says it's not found. That's amazing. And then we have to look in here. Yes, TX, TY, TZ, right? So what did I do here? I named this T with a capital T. So there's 2 things I can do. I can change all these in here, or I can go into my chop right here and then change these elements. So I can capitalize this T, and I can capitalize this T, and I can capitalize this T, right? And then our flag goes away. So I would probably do it the other way and just have the lowercase, but I'm just showing you 2 different ways to do this, right? So in my pattern you saw in the example is I had these waves kind of following. So I want to change this pattern, and the first thing, this pattern top, I'm going to change this to a cosine, and then that gives us this little element right here, right? And this is going to be the power of how we're doing things within these parameter pages over here on the top, and these are some of the adjustments that we are going to make. You know, steps per cycle, different elements like that. So like right now, if I do steps per cycle on this and I change it to 1, you can see how our little chop to data is positioning and changing, right? So let's just leave that off for a second. So I'm going to take that back to 0. And we are going to go in some of the different elements here. And we're just going to start to create like our particle network so we can see what's happening, right? So on this chop to, I'm going to take that and I'm going to change or add that on the tail end of that into our particle, right? So now our particles are kind of drawing in space. So, but we want to see that in everything that's going on over here, right? So we want to see how these things are positioning, how they're transforming, etc., etc. So in our friendly instancing tab, this is where we start to do the magic, right? And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a null on the back end of this in case I add anything. I'm just going to call this position. And here I am then going to take this position and put it in my translate OP. And I'm going to start to activate these points, right? Position 0, P1, P2. So now we have our lines kind of like drawing in space and where things are going. And this is some of the things and the elements that we're going to create, and we're going to do our auto reactive over here, right? But I also want to, because it's fun to look at these lines, but I also want to create like a little feedback network and to start to do that so we have some like depth to the space. So if we go in here, we do our normal feedback. So we're going to add a feedback. We are going to then add a transform or a level. Let's do level first. And then we're going to do a transform. And yes, there it is, transform. Of course, you can always type in the field. Like I always say, I prefer not to. There is no reason other than I guess I just always like to look for these things. So blur, put the blur in here. We don't need to use this right now, so I'm just going to kind of push that off. And then we're going to do our standard like composite here and not the add. So let's do a composite. Right, and we're going to take this, we're going to put it over here, we're going to take this, we're going to drive it over here, we're going to bring this back into our network, everything is going to turn off because we don't have it connected. Going to bring this back in the feedback, everything starts coming back, drag our comp over our feedback to create our network, and then we're going to do a couple things. So in our transform here, we are going to, or in our level here, sorry, we are going to change our opacity to 0.99. In our comp here, we're going to change this to over. So now our lines are coming back. In our transform, this scale right here, I'm going to change this to 0.9 and 0.9. So now we have like that depth, right? So everything is kind of like going down the road. So that makes it fun. Okay. The other thing too, to kind of like give this some color as we play with this is, because we're going to kind of be like adjusting things and how they look, is our size wise for our transforms and the rest, but let's give it some color. So we're going to do what is called a lookup, and we're going to add our lookup right there, and we are going to do a ramp. Once I drag this into the ramp, you can see that we can start to like how we're going to color these things, but it's black and white, so nothing is happening. And so I'm going to start to create like a pattern here. And the way in the example, I kind of had like a lot of black space and then some different elements. So I'm going to show you a couple techniques. Is I'm going to take this, I'm going to leave this there, and I'm going to drag this all the way back over to black. Then I'm going to add another point in here. I'm going to take this and then draw this to like a blue. And then I'm just kind of like eyeing on what I'm looking at and like what colors I would want per se. And I'm just going to create these like different parameters in here. And I do this by creating some of these other points, like so I can match some purples. But these points in here too, and you can match like all this data in here to this other point, is I'm just trying to create like more of like a block of color. And then like how it kind of spells out, right? So So like there's going to be things within the wave and how they like color. And that's why if you bring some of these things closer, etc., it starts to push off that way, right? So there is our like depth of field. There is this, and maybe I don't need that much black since that's taken away a lot of the trail. I bring this back to the blue. And there you go, right? So we have now, if we're diving into the particles, right? So if you look at the particles in here, we have all these different values in here. Like what is the life expectancy of the particle? What is the variance? What is the drag? What is the mass? What is the birth count? Like we only have one right now, right? So one particle is kind of being birthed. The expectancy is 3. Our mass is 1. So I'm going to change these values. I'm going to change this to 10. And then I'm going to change the birth to 1,000, right? So we have more particles in space. I'm going to change the life expectancy, let's say to 100. And my birth count, I'm going to change to 1,000. And then I'm going to pulse this, right? So now we have like particles moving in space. You can see this wonderful geometry right there, which is very cool. And we kind of go from there. The other thing is within this, and this is part, since we're talking about particles and driving audio into particles and how all these different things work, is we're going to see, you know, what we can do in here and how we can change some forces, like some external forces, some wind, some turbulence. And this is just something that, like, when you're creating something or you're looking at a vision like this, you just kind of look around and see, like, what setting should I change? You know, it's the art of generative, you know, kind of real-time graphics. So there's lots of different things you can do. And then a lot of this drive, like I said before, is where are these patterns sitting in space? You know, what's happening with this if I change like the cycle? You know, if I'm changing some of these different like phases, if I phase this out as 1,000. So this will start to like change some of those elements. Okay, so when I have this transform in here too, I also added this, and I'm going to change this uniform scale to 0.01, right? So now I'm kind of just pushing that in space, and you can see how automatically that switched something too, right? So things are moving, things are happening, but in this, I want to change how this is drawn. And this is really going to start with, what are these elements here? How are they assigned within our pattern? And what are we doing? You know, so if I change this to a cosine, you know, then we're drawing a different element, right? So there's different things in here and how those things are working out. So it's really, this is like kind of our guide per se of like, this is what we're trying to do. And this is what we're trying to accomplish. And this is the picture we're kind of looking for, is how we position this. And again, this is just the camera view looking straight over these particles on the z-axis, right? That's kind of just, you know, pushing through there, and it's looking at x and y as the crosshairs. So camera sitting at z0 is just looking down the road. So as you position your camera in the future, or you do some camera movements and things like that, then that would change everything out. Okay, so this is kind of where we go back in and we say, okay, what are we looking for in terms of, you know, a look? And maybe we don't need a phase at 100, you know, so those are different elements and different things we want to do. But the other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to set up a simple audio reactive network here. And for this example, I'm going to use the TouchDesigner default file that everybody knows. It's using TouchDesigner. It has all the wonderful things. I don't need to play the sound here because I really don't want to listen to it, but this is where you could drag in your files, drag in your content, etc., right? So we'll just take this, turn off the display, and we are going to add, actually in here, we'll just, instead of creating a whole scenario here, we're just going to open the palette. We're going to bring in an audio analysis. We're going to connect this to this, and by default, just so you know, this default audio file in is actually sitting inside this audio analysis, but we will just keep it how it is right now and just kind of, you know, recreate things, right? And kind of move things around. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to slide this over. I'm going to turn off my palette again. And I'm going to create a little chain of events here. So I'm going to do a rename. and put that out there. I'm going to do a math so I can increase anything that I would like to. And as you see, as you start to create these networks, you're like, okay, need some more room here. I'm going to slide this baby over. And we are then going to do a null. So we're going to add the null in there. And what else do we want to add? I think that that is okay for now. And I'm just going to rename this to turb. Let's see, no, let's say turb. And so this is going to be something that's going to be affecting our turbulence. Oh, this is what I want to do. I want to add a select. I don't know why, but I do know why. I just like to have everything clean. So I'm going to name this, and I'm going to select this as the low value, right? Because I'm taking a lot of data in here. I don't want to see all this stuff. And then I can build other select chains off and do other things, right? So within this, you can also see within audio analysis is we have some different values happening here, right? And you can see the smoothness, the add, the gain, the threshold. Low means that we're selecting it, and TouchDesigner did a great job of redoing this and making it, you know, more selecting options and things like that. So we want to keep this on, but I'm going to take this smooth factor and drive that, right? Because I don't want to, without adding a bunch of lags and other things, I just want to have like a smooth push here. And I'm also going to do a little add so I have like a little bit more, you know, gain. So you can think of the same thing as if you would think of like an audio land and compressors and thresholds, you know, so where is the gain? So I'm adding some things. I could always do that in the math down the road. But I'm just kind of doing this, and I'm just going to then change my smoothness a little bit more. You know, so it's kind of, it has some movement to it, but it's not doing anything crazy per se. So back in here, before we start kind of changing this, let's make our design a little bit more, you know, some more things going on here. So I'm going to change the length of this cosine to 2000. And then I am going to, let's see, in here, I'm going to change this to phase of 1000. Maybe that's good. Maybe change this to a 1. Nope, don't want to do that. I'm going to change this to 100, maybe 1000. Steps per cycle, I'm going to change that out to 0. And then in this one, going back to the pattern, it's a sine. I'm going to change this to 2000. And my phase, I'm going to change to 1000. Let's see here with the phase. I'm trying to think about how I want to draw this. Do I want to make exactly the same thing I made before? I don't know. So let's see here. We have this. We have this. Number of cycles. If we bring that in, there we go. We're back to kind of what we did. Let's see here. Our chop output, our particle network. It has some stuff going on. It's kind of chaotic. Let's go back to our particles here and see what we have. Here we have 10, 1000. Let's change our life expectancy to 10. Let's pulse this. And I'm not really liking how that looks. It's not really driving to how I want. But we have to change, again, some other elements in here. And this is the cool thing, too, is we could change all kinds of things, like in our phase here. This is really the beauty of, like, how this was being drawn in space, right? And so how this cosine is, like, moving down the road. So let's do this. Let's take this and put in ABS times dot seconds. And let's, yes, many errors there, a space. So now we have like this drawing effect, right? And you can see it moving in the chop. You can repulse our particle. Our particles has some other stuff that's being drawn over it. But we have this cool kind of like Mobius strip effect. And this is all dependent, again, on like how these things are reacting with each other, right? So if we change our phase out, and we bring our phase back down to here. Let's say this is a 0. And then let's take down this little sign here. And I'm going to divide this by 2. So we're not moving as fast. Right? And we can kind of just keep going back from here. So our feedback, pulse that baby out, we can kind of see, you know, how things are being drawn, again, what's happening in the space, and then we can still keep messing with these things in our particles and saying, okay, what do we have that's happening here? And this is within this little auto reactive. I can take this turbulence and I can take this and bring it over to the Z, whether I want a turbulence or I want a wind or force and things like that. So let's push that. And you can see how this is like drawing within the particle lands. And you can see we're starting to like develop some shapes in space. And there's many things going on in here, right? So we did the feedback loop, we did the transforms, you know, so these are the powers of like playing with these numbers and really dialing in exactly what you want as you keep pushing things out. So in our particle, let's see, let's go back here. Oh, this is what I want to do. In my render, I do want to change what this is. So I'm going to change this to 1920 by 1080. Right, so give it a little bit more resolution. We can add our blur here in effect. Where is our ramp sitting in space? You know, so we could change the phase of the ramp, right? So we're changing some different colors, some different things. Of course, one of my favorites is like changing the period, right? So you're giving some other depth in that. But we'll just leave those, you know, at what they are for right now. But I just want to kind of give you some examples of like how things are moving in space and then how we can just keep focusing on what we want to do in this situation. All those different elements. The other thing too is within this box, I have this ability now because it's a box in space to like add different elements. So I can say here, I can draw this as a 4, right? So I'm given different elements of how that is pushing through space, you know, what is happening, how those things are operating. So back in here, let's take some more adjustments here. So we're going to do this, and I'm actually going to take this part out, right? So I don't really want that to kind of push through. I'm just going to leave this where it is, but I'm going to change this to 1. And in here, I'm going to change these elements again. This is cosine. I'm going to change this phase to 1. And I'm just looking at these values down here. I'm just looking at this drawing. So I'm getting closer to kind of what I had before. 1,000, 1, 1. Let's say change this phase out to 1,000, right? So this is kind of like the example is, and this is kind of what I was looking for. And this is kind of like some of the positional data and what it's drawing, but we can go back into this particle. And if you see like this turbulence here, I could also do this same value and create some force to this. So if I take this and drive this into the z-axis of force, now it's kind of like organically growing through space, right? So I'm pushing those things. Even though I named this turbulence, I probably should have named it something else. But it's kind of like just going through there and doing some different things. So this is kind of the effect, and this is, you know, a playground which you can look for, and then you just have to keep thinking of, okay, what are we doing here? Like, what are some different elements? What are some different steps in here? You know, how are we rendering this as lines? Are we rendering this as point sprites? I prefer point sprites for this. Behavior particle system, sure. Attractor points, all points, single point as per particle. Reuse points in loop, sure. Pulse. Bam. See how all of a sudden we had this massive mess, and then we adjusted some things and we pulsed this. So now we're getting that effect, right? We're getting this drawing effect. We get this you know, symmetry that's going down and doing those different things. So you can, you know, when you're building these things out, add a keyboard in, and you can, you know, again, assign this to your particle. Take this keyboard in, take this, bring it over here as a pulse. Every time I hit 1, I'm pulsing this back out. See, so this is the dealing with particles and dealing with these things. This is really where you kind of drawing over space, where are particles emitting, all those different levels and things like that. And that's how you kind of have to like push and look at things and what you want to do. So in this transform, let's say we see how we're pushing in space, or we see these different elements. With even in our particles here, we can see that our forces here, we have these numbers, right? So we're picking up this chop. Let's say we want that force to go the opposite way. We hit negative. right? So now it's pushing it the opposite way because we're doing this in a different value, in a different subset chain, right? So within our ramp, you know, do we want this white color at the end? Do we want a different color for that? You know, those are some of the things that you can play with and say, nope, I want this drawn a different way. So this is kind of the power of creating all these things. And really what's driving, again, a lot of this is really these patterns. And, you know, that's the benefit of how we're going to do this. And it's really, that's the beauty of it, is you're creating these things based on chop patterns. So that should be fun. So I think this is a good place to stop and give everybody the opportunity to create their own artwork. Why would they always want to recreate what I do? Right? So here's some elements, here's some different things you can do. You can always change out some different geometries and things like that. So thanks for joining us for this TouchDesigner tutorial. Thank you very much.